I never thought adopting a puppy would change my entire understanding of my family. Honestly, I wasn't even planning to adopt one. For most of my adult life, I had been the kind of person who always had a reason not to get a pet. I worked long hours, traveled occasionally for work, and liked coming home to a quiet house. But after turning 31, something about that quiet started bothering me. My house felt less peaceful and more empty. So one Saturday morning, I drove to a local animal rescue center just to look. That was my first mistake. The second was making eye contact with Buddy. He was sitting in the corner of a kennel, a small golden brown puppy with floppy ears and enormous dark eyes. While the other dogs were barking and jumping against the gates, Buddy simply watched me. When I crouched down, he slowly walked over and placed one paw against the bars. "Don't do that," I whispered. He tilted his head. 5 minutes later, I was filling out adoption paperwork. By the time I got home, Buddy had already destroyed a roll of toilet paper, fallen asleep inside my laundry basket, and stolen one of my slippers. I was completely in love. That evening, I called my mother. I did something impulsive, I told her. There was silence. "What did you do, Claire?" "I adopted a puppy." Mom laughed softly. "A puppy? You?" "His name is Buddy." Then something strange happened. The moment I said the name, Mom stopped laughing. "Where did you get him?" "The Riverside Animal Rescue." Another pause. "Mom?" "Nothing." "That's fine." Her voice sounded different. I frowned. "Why?" "I just remembered something. That's all." I didn't think much of it. Until 3 days later. Buddy was chewing on a cardboard box I had left beside my desk when something inside fell onto the floor. It was his adoption folder. I picked it up, expecting to find vaccination records and the usual paperwork. Instead, I noticed a handwritten note attached to the back. Previous owner, S. Reed. I stared at the name. Reed. I had heard that name before. I couldn't remember where. That night, I mentioned it to my brother Ethan. We were having dinner at our parents' house when I casually said, Buddy's previous owner was apparently someone named Reed. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked down at his plate. And suddenly nobody was eating. "What?" I asked. Ethan cleared his throat. "It's probably nothing." Why did everyone just go silent? "Claire," Mom said gently, "some names are better left in the past." That answer made my stomach tighten. What does Reed have to do with our family? Nobody answered. I looked at Dad. He finally raised his eyes. "Where exactly did you see that name?" "In Buddy's paperwork." Dad's face went pale. It was only for a second. But I saw it. And that's when I realized something. My parents weren't surprised by the name. They were afraid of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, Buddy started whining beside my bedroom door. I followed him downstairs. He was standing beside the box containing his things from the rescue center. When I opened it, I found his old collar. There was a tiny metal tag attached to it. I turned it over. On the back was an address. I recognized it immediately. It was the address of the house where my family had lived when I was a little girl. I stood completely still. Buddy looked up at me. And for the first time since bringing him home, I wondered if adopting him had really been a coincidence. Because somehow, this little puppy had just led me straight into my family's past. I spent the rest of the night staring at the address on Buddy's collar. I knew that house. At least, I thought I did. My parents had moved away from it when I was 6, and whenever I'd asked about it growing up, Mom always gave me the same answer. It was just our first house. Nothing special. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The address on Buddy's tag was the exact same one. I checked it 3 times online. There was no mistake. At 7 the next morning, I called my mother. "Mom, why was Buddy's old address our old house?" Silence. Long enough that I could hear Buddy chewing something behind me. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked. "His collar has the address." "You must have read it wrong." "I didn't." Another silence. Then Mom said quietly, "Claire, please don't go there." That was the moment I knew I absolutely had to. I drove there that afternoon. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had faded, the wooden porch sagged slightly, and the garden was completely overgrown. I sat in my car for several minutes before getting out. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe answers. Maybe proof that I wasn't imagining things. The current owner was an elderly woman named Mrs. Palmer. When I explained that my family had lived there years ago, she invited me inside. "You're Daniel Morgan's daughter, aren't you?" My heart skipped. "How do you know my father?" She smiled sadly. "I remember your family." Then she looked at Buddy. Her expression changed. "That dog. What about him? Where did you get him?" "Riverside Animal Rescue." Mrs. Palmer slowly sat down. "I thought he was gone." I stared at her. "Gone where?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward an old cabinet and pulled out a dusty photograph. She handed it to me. It showed my parents standing in front of the house. My father looked younger. My mother was holding me. But there was another person standing beside them. A woman. I didn't recognize her. She was holding a baby. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 4 words. Daniel, Margaret, Sarah, Claire. My hand started shaking. "Who is Sarah?" Mrs. Palmer looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know?" "No." She stared at the photograph again. "Your parents told me never to speak about her." "Who was she?" Before Mrs. Palmer could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. I recognized it immediately. My father's car. Dad got out and walked toward the house. He looked furious. "Claire." I had never heard him say my name like that. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Why are you here?" I held up the photograph. "Who is Sarah?" Dad froze. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." My heart started pounding. "What does that mean?" He looked at Buddy. Then at the photograph. Finally, he sat down. "Sarah was your sister." I felt the room spin. "My sister?" Dad nodded. "She was born before you." I stared at him. "Then where is she?" His eyes filled with tears. "She died." The answer should have ended everything. But something didn't make sense. I pointed at the photograph. "Dad, if she died, why does Buddy's paperwork have her last name?" Dad's face went completely blank. I knew immediately. He was hiding something. And before I could ask another question, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I answered. "Claire, where are you?" "At the old house." His breathing became uneven. "Listen to me. Dad isn't telling you everything." My eyes went to my father. "What aren't you telling me?" Ethan hesitated. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Sarah didn't die." The call ended. I looked at Dad. He was crying. And suddenly I understood that the biggest secret in my family wasn't about someone who had died 30 years ago. It was about someone who might still be alive. I couldn't move. For several seconds, I just stood there with my phone pressed against my ear, even though Ethan had already hung up. "Dad," I whispered. He wouldn't look at me. "Tell me the truth." He rubbed his hands over his face. "Claire, you don't understand what you're asking. My brother just told me Sarah didn't die." Dad closed his eyes. "She was supposed to." That sentence made my stomach turn. "What does that mean?" He finally looked at me. "She disappeared." "Disappeared?" "She was 20 years old." I stared at him. "Then why did you tell me she died?" "Because that's what we told everyone." "Everyone?" He stood and walked toward the window. "Your mother and I were terrified. Sarah left one night and never came back. We searched for her. We contacted the police. We called hospitals. Nothing. Then why hide it from me?" Dad turned around. "Because you were 6. I shook my head. "That doesn't explain anything." "It does when you understand what happened before she disappeared." I waited. Dad swallowed hard. "Sarah wasn't your biological sister." The room seemed to go silent. What? She was your mother's daughter from a previous relationship. I looked at the photograph again. Sarah's face suddenly seemed different. I had always thought there was something familiar about her. But now I couldn't stop looking at her eyes. Why did she disappear? Dad didn't answer. Instead, he walked to an old desk in the corner. From the bottom drawer, he pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me. Inside was a photograph of Sarah holding a baby. My baby. I knew it immediately. The tiny face. The blanket. The room. It was the nursery from our old house. My hand started trembling. That's me. Dad nodded. Sarah was obsessed with protecting you. Protecting me from what? Before he could answer, the front door opened. Mom walked inside. She looked at Dad. Then at me. Her expression told me she knew the truth was finally coming out. Claire, she said quietly. I held up the photograph. Why was Sarah holding me? Mom's eyes filled with tears. Because she was your sister. You just said she wasn't my biological sister. She wasn't. Then what was she to me? Mom sat down. Your biological mother. I stopped breathing. The words didn't make sense. What? Mom began crying. Sarah gave birth to you. I stepped backward. No. You were only a baby. Sarah was young, frightened, and in trouble. She couldn't take care of you. Stop. She asked us to raise you. Stop. Buddy began barking. My entire body was shaking. I looked at Dad. You're telling me that the woman I thought was my sister. I couldn't finish. Mom whispered the words for me. She was your mother. I couldn't understand how the world I'd lived in for 31 years could suddenly become a lie. Then why did you tell me she died? Mom covered her face. Because she came back. My head snapped toward her. What? Sarah came back 3 years after you were born. Dad stepped forward. She wanted you. I felt sick. What happened? Mom looked at me through her tears. We refused. Why? Because by then, you were our daughter. We couldn't imagine losing you. I stared at them. And Sarah? Dad's voice broke. She disappeared again. I looked down at Buddy. The puppy was sitting beside my feet, staring up at me. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A small scar beneath his collar. And beside it, engraved into the metal tag, was another name. Sarah. My heart stopped. Someone hadn't simply left Buddy at the shelter. Someone had deliberately made sure he would find me. And suddenly I realized there was only one person who could have done that. My biological mother. Sarah. If she was alive. She had been trying to reach me. For 30 years. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph of Sarah holding me as a baby. My mother. Not my sister. My mother. The word felt wrong in my head, like it belonged to somebody else's life. By morning, I had made one decision. I was going to find her. I started with Buddy. I called the rescue center and asked for every detail they had about his arrival. Laura, the volunteer who had handled his paperwork, agreed to meet me. When I showed her the photograph of Sarah, her face changed. You know her? Laura stared at the picture. No. But I've seen this woman. My heart jumped. When? A few months ago. She went to a filing cabinet and pulled out an old folder. Buddy wasn't brought in by Sarah, she explained. He was dropped off by another woman. Who? Laura turned the folder around. The name was handwritten on the intake form. S. Reed. I stared at it. Sarah Reed. Laura nodded. She didn't give us much information. Just said Buddy needed a safe home. Did you see her? Yes. Do you remember anything? Laura thought for a moment. She was nervous. She kept asking whether the person who adopted Buddy would receive his entire medical history. Why? I don't know. Laura hesitated. Actually, there was something strange. What? She specifically asked whether we still had your family listed in our old records. My heart pounded. What did she say? Laura looked uncomfortable. She asked if a Claire Morgan had ever adopted from us. I couldn't breathe. She knew my name? Laura nodded. She said, if Claire Morgan ever comes here, give her the dog. I felt tears forming in my eyes. She had planned this. Sarah had known I would eventually come. I asked Laura if Sarah had left any contact information. She shook her head. Only this. She handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was an address. Not a house. A hospital. A children's hospital in the next county. I drove there immediately. At the reception desk, I gave the receptionist the name Sarah Reed. She searched the computer. Then she looked at me. Are you family? I swallowed. I think I am. She disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she handed me another piece of paper. Someone left this for you. I unfolded it. There was only one sentence. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I waited so long. My hands trembled. Below it was another address. This time, it was a small apartment building. I drove there with Buddy beside me. Apartment 214. I stood outside the door for almost a minute before knocking. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I noticed an envelope taped to the door. My name was written across it. Claire Morgan. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed a young Sarah sitting on the floor, holding me as a baby. But there was someone else in the background. My father. And beside him stood a man I had never seen before. On the back of the photograph was a message. He knows the truth. Ask him why he really took you from me. I stared at the words. My father had told me Sarah simply disappeared. My mother had told me Sarah gave me to them. But now Sarah was telling me something completely different. I rushed back home. Dad was waiting for me. The moment he saw the photograph, his face went pale. Where did you get that? From Sarah. He froze. She knows I'm looking for her. Dad slowly sat down. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. Claire. What? He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Your mother didn't give you to us. I felt my stomach drop. What are you saying? Dad's voice cracked. We took you. Buddy suddenly began barking at the front door. Someone was standing outside. I turned toward the window. A woman was watching the house from across the street. Even from a distance, I knew those eyes. I'd seen them in the photograph. Sarah. My biological mother was alive. And she had finally come back for me. I ran outside before my father could stop me. The woman across the street was already walking away. Sarah. She froze. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she slowly turned around. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways in the few hours since discovering the truth. I imagined anger. I imagined tears. I imagined screaming at her for abandoning me. But when I finally saw her face, all I could feel was confusion. She looked older than the woman in the photographs, of course. Her hair was streaked with gray, and there were deep lines around her eyes. But there was no mistaking her. She looked like me. The same eyes. The same crooked smile. The same small scar above the left eyebrow. She whispered my name. Claire. I couldn't move. You're Sarah. She nodded. I am. I walked toward her. Why did you leave me? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't. I stopped. My parents told me you gave me to them. They lied. The word hit me harder than I expected. Why? Because your father thought he was protecting you. I looked back at our house. Dad was standing in the doorway. Sarah noticed him. Her expression changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. She grabbed my arm. Don't let him come near you. I pulled away. Tell me everything. Sarah took a deep breath. When I was 18, I got pregnant. Your father wasn't your biological father. He was already married to your mother at the time, but he had been helping me financially. I stared at her. Why? Because I was his daughter. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. What? Sarah shook her head. Not biologically. He had been my guardian since I was a child. My confusion only grew. My biological father died when I was young. Daniel stepped in. He became obsessed with controlling my life. She looked toward my father. When I became pregnant, he decided the baby couldn't stay with me. You mean me? Yes. Sarah's voice trembled. He told me I was too young. He told me I would ruin your life. He promised he would help you temporarily. And my mother? Margaret agreed. I felt tears burning my eyes. Did you fight for me? I never stopped. Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside were dozens of letters. All addressed to me. All written over many years. I wrote to you every birthday, she whispered. I looked through them. There were letters dated 5 years ago. 10 years ago. 20 years ago. One even had my 18th birthday written across the front. Why didn't I receive any of these? Your father intercepted them. I looked back at Dad. He was still standing in the doorway. I walked toward him. Is this true? He said nothing. Did you hide her letters? His silence answered me. My voice broke. You stole my mother from me. Dad finally spoke. I saved you. No. I shook my head. You took away my choice. He looked devastated. I loved you. You don't get to call it love when you lied to me for 30 years. Mom appeared behind him. She was crying. Claire, please. I turned toward her. Did you know? She nodded. That hurt even more. Both of them had lied. For my entire life. Then Sarah stepped closer. I didn't come back to take you away, she said. I looked at her. Then why? She glanced at Buddy. Because I knew you would never believe me if I simply showed up. I looked down at the puppy. What does Buddy have to do with you? Sarah smiled sadly. Everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It showed Buddy as a tiny puppy. But beside him was another dog. A much older golden brown dog. I recognized it immediately. It had been in the photograph of our old house. That's the dog I had when I was pregnant with you, Sarah said. My heart stopped. Buddy is his grandson. I stared at her. She continued quietly. I knew your family would never tell you the truth. So when I found Buddy, I realized I had one last chance. She looked directly into my eyes. I didn't send you a puppy, Claire. She smiled through her tears. I sent you a path back to me. For the first time in my life, I looked at my parents and didn't recognize them. I had spent 31 years believing I knew exactly where I came from. Daniel and Margaret Morgan were my parents. Our family had arguments, holidays, awkward conversations, and old photographs like everyone else. But underneath all of that was a secret so enormous that it made every memory feel different. I couldn't stay in that house. I took Buddy and drove to Sarah's apartment. She opened the door before I even knocked. She had apparently been waiting for me. I need proof, I said. Sarah nodded. I knew you would. She led me into a small bedroom. There were boxes everywhere. Old photographs. Letters. Documents. And newspaper clippings. She opened one box. Inside was a hospital bracelet. I picked it up. Baby girl Reed. My hand started shaking. That's yours, Sarah whispered. Then she showed me a birth certificate. My name was different. Claire Sarah Reed. I stared at it. What happened to my last name? Daniel changed it. When? After he took you home. I sat down. There was one question I couldn't stop thinking about. Why didn't you go to court? Sarah's expression became painful. I tried. She pulled out another folder. Inside were legal documents. A custody petition. Police reports. Letters from attorneys. She had fought for me. For years. Then I noticed something strange. A document dated 30 years ago. It stated that Sarah had voluntarily surrendered parental rights. But you didn't. No. Then who signed this? Sarah pointed to the signature. My stomach twisted. It looked like Sarah's handwriting. But Sarah shook her head. That isn't my signature. Then why was it accepted? Because your father had connections. I didn't know what to say. Then Sarah reached into another box. This is why I contacted Buddy's rescue center. She pulled out a photograph. It showed my father standing beside another man. The same man from the photograph I'd found at the apartment. Who is he? Sarah hesitated. Your biological father. I stopped breathing. You said he died. I was told he died. Was he? I don't know. Sarah pointed at the man. His name was Michael Reed. My heart began pounding. Reed? She nodded. The same Reed on Buddy's paperwork. Everything suddenly connected. The puppy's previous owner. The old house. The photographs. Sarah. The letters. But there was still one enormous question. Why had my father wanted me away from both of my biological parents? Sarah looked at me. Because Michael knew what Daniel had done. What did he do? She shook her head. I don't know all of it. You have to tell me. I only know that Michael disappeared shortly after you were born. My blood ran cold. Disappeared? Sarah nodded. He was investigating money that Daniel had been moving through a family business. I stared at her. What family business? Your grandfather's company. I suddenly remembered something. The old stories. My grandfather had owned a construction company. My father had always said it went bankrupt before I was born. But that wasn't true. I knew because I'd once found an old newspaper clipping saying the company had been sold for millions. I had never understood where the money went. Sarah saw the realization on my face. You know something. My father told me the company failed. Sarah shook her head. It didn't. She opened another folder. Inside were financial records. Bank transfers. Property deeds. Offshore accounts. And one document that made my hands go numb. A life insurance policy. The beneficiary was Daniel Morgan. The insured person was Michael Reed. The date was 3 weeks before Michael disappeared. I looked at Sarah. Did Dad kill him? She immediately shook her head. I don't know. But you think he did. I think your father knows what happened to Michael. I couldn't argue with that. Then my phone rang. It was Ethan. I answered. His voice was barely a whisper. Claire, you need to come back to the old house. Why? I found something in the attic. What? He took a breath. Dad's been hiding a box up there for 30 years. What was inside? Ethan's voice trembled. Michael's passport. I froze. Because if Michael's passport had been hidden in our house, then the man everyone said had disappeared might never have left. I drove back to my parents' house with Sarah beside me. Neither of us spoke. I couldn't stop thinking about the passport Ethan had found. Michael Reed. My biological father. The man I had been told was dead. When we arrived, Ethan was waiting outside. He looked exhausted. Where's Dad? Gone. Mom? She locked herself in the bedroom. Ethan held up a small cardboard box. This was hidden behind a loose board in the attic. I opened it. Inside were Michael's passport, several photographs, bank statements, and an old newspaper. But there was something else. A hotel key. On the back, someone had written, Room 214. My heart stopped. The same room number from the apartment building where Sarah had left me the letter. This can't be a coincidence, I whispered. Sarah took the key from my hand. It isn't. We drove there immediately. The building looked abandoned. The lobby was almost empty. A maintenance worker told us room 214 hadn't been occupied for years. I showed him the key. He stared at it. That key hasn't been used since the old owner closed the place. Can we see the room? He hesitated. then unlocked the door. The room was almost completely empty, except for a wooden desk. Inside the desk was a single envelope. My name was written on it. Claire. I opened it with shaking hands. The first line made my heart stop. If you're reading this, then Daniel failed to keep the truth buried. I looked at Sarah. She covered her mouth. The letter was from Michael. He explained everything. He had discovered that Daniel had been secretly transferring money from the family company into accounts under different names. When Michael confronted him, Daniel threatened him. But Michael had collected evidence. He planned to take it to the police. Then, 3 days before he disappeared, he discovered something even worse. Daniel had been using my identity. A bank account had been opened in my name when I was only a baby. Money had been moved through it for years. I felt sick. My father hadn't just stolen my childhood. He had built an entire financial scheme around me. But the final paragraph was the worst. Sarah, if you ever read this, I need you to know I didn't leave you. Daniel made me disappear. Sarah began crying. I continued reading. Michael had gone into hiding because he believed Daniel would hurt him. He had planned to return once he had enough evidence. But he never got the chance. The letter ended with one sentence. If anything happens to me, find Claire. She deserves to know who her family really is. I lowered the paper. Then where is he? A voice came from behind us. I'd been asking myself that for 30 years. We turned. An older man stood in the doorway. Gray hair. Tired eyes. A familiar face. Sarah gasped. Michael? The man nodded. She ran toward him. They embraced, both crying. I couldn't move. My biological father was standing in front of me. Alive. After 30 years. He looked at me. Claire. I finally stepped forward. I'm your daughter. He smiled through his tears. I know. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why didn't he find me? Why didn't he come back? Why did he let me believe he was dead? But before I could speak, Michael pulled another envelope from his coat. This is why I stayed away. Inside were photographs of Daniel meeting with several men. Dates. Locations. Financial records. And one final document. It proved Daniel had forged Sarah's custody papers. But there was something even bigger. Michael had discovered that Daniel wasn't acting alone. Someone else in our family had helped him. I looked at the name. My hands went cold. It was Ethan. I stared at my brother. He looked at me. And whispered. I can explain. Ethan's voice was barely audible. I stared at him, unable to understand what I was seeing. For the first time, I wondered if every person in my family had been lying to me. Explain what? Ethan looked at Michael. Then at Sarah. Finally, he looked at me. I knew about you. I felt my chest tighten. You knew Sarah was my mother? He nodded. I found out when I was 17. 17? Dad accidentally left some documents on his desk. I found the original custody papers. I didn't understand everything at first, but I knew enough to realize that Claire wasn't the whole story. Then why didn't you tell me? Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Because Dad threatened me. I said nothing. He told me that if I ever told you, he'd destroy Mom, Sarah, and me financially. He had already done terrible things to Michael. I was scared. Michael stepped forward. You were a child, Ethan. I know. Ethan looked at me. But I should have told you anyway. For a moment, I hated him. Then I realized something. He had been 17. He had been trapped in the same family as me. The difference was that he had discovered the truth before I did. I asked the question that mattered most. What happened to Dad? Ethan pointed toward the door. He went to the police. My heart stopped. The police? He knew Michael had evidence. He knew everything was finally coming out. We left the hotel and went to the police station. Daniel was there. Sitting alone in an interview room. When he saw me through the glass, he looked broken. I walked inside. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered. I never meant for you to suffer. You lied to me for 31 years. I was afraid. Of what? That you'd choose them. I stared at him. You were my father. His eyes filled with tears. I loved you. Then you should have trusted me with the truth. He looked down. I thought if you never knew, you could have a normal life. I shook my head. You didn't give me a normal life. I placed the old photograph on the table. You gave me a life built on a lie. Daniel eventually confessed. He admitted forging Sarah's custody documents, hiding her letters, manipulating the family business records, and helping create the false story about Michael's disappearance. He claimed he never intended to hurt anyone. But the evidence told a different story. Michael had survived by staying hidden. Sarah had spent decades trying to find a way back to me. And Buddy had unknowingly become the bridge between us. Months later, the investigation was over. Daniel faced the consequences of his actions. My relationship with him never returned to what it had been. But I didn't completely erase him from my life either. Some wounds don't disappear. They simply become scars. Sarah moved closer to me. Michael became part of my life too. For the first time, I had the chance to know the people whose existence had been hidden from me. And Buddy? He remained exactly what he had always been. A goofy puppy who loved stealing socks. One evening, I sat on my porch with Sarah while Buddy slept at our feet. She looked at me. Do you regret adopting him? I smiled. Never. I looked down at Buddy. A simple adoption had led me to an old address. The address had led me to a photograph. The photograph had led me to Sarah. And Sarah had led me to the truth about my entire family. I used to think Buddy was the puppy I rescued. Now I understood. He had rescued me too. Not from danger. From a life where I never knew who I really was. And sometimes, I think the strangest things happen for a reason. Because I wasn't looking for my biological parents when I walked into that shelter. I was only looking for a dog. Instead, I found my family.